Hi, I'm Keegan Flegner. I'm 17 years old and I live in Santa Monica, California. When I was in first grade, I was diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum. Since that time, sports have played a huge role in changing my life. So I want to show the world how all kinds of sports can help all kinds of people with all kinds of mental and emotional challenges. Welcome to Sports on the Spectrum. My guest today is Kurt Schwengel. I met Kurt when I decided to try out for the Santa Monica High School beach volleyball team in 10th grade. Although I started in volleyball many years after I began basketball, the prospect of playing on the beautiful beaches of Santa Monica, where so many stars like Sinjin Smith, Misty May-Treanor, and Sato had started, was too appealing to pass up. Like me, Kurt also grew up and played sports in Santa Monica, pitching at an all-league level for Santa Monica High School and then UCLA's baseball teams. Kurt has been a kindergarten teacher for 25 years, teaching thousands of young students, including several mainstream students with autism and Down syndrome. He created an original educational curriculum called Rock and Roll Kindergarten, introducing it to over 20,000 teachers across the country. Kurt's background is also interesting to me because he realized he had ADHD while in college. Please join me in welcoming Kurt Schwengel to Sports on the Spectrum. So, Kurt, to get started, and this is something, if for my longtime viewers, they know I love to do this, is I always like to start an interview by talking about you from the beginning. And basically what I mean by that is I want to get to have our audience get to know you from, your days as a kid and all, how you first got into all this stuff. So first question, what were your very first memories of sports, and it can be anything related to them, like watching them on TV, going to a game, playing it, whatever.
Okay, well, like you, I grew up in Santa Monica, a very, very a sports haven. Where from kindergarten on,
Yep.
all your friends are constantly playing sports.
Right.
It was. I had an identical twin brother, and
Okay.
where we grew up on the beach down there, so we were constantly playing out on the beach and stuff.
Yep.
But we didn't start organized sports until we were 9.
Okay.
Now, that may sound young to some people,
Right.
but better than anybody.
Yeah.
You start at 5 in Santa Monica. Basically, in kindergarten, your parents plop you on a soccer team or a t-ball team.
Yep.
My dad, who was an incredible athlete, he played football and ran track at the University of Iowa, so big time jock.
Yep.
He didn't really believe in youth sports, specifically t-ball. Okay.
Oh.
He thought t-ball was for babies.
Okay.
And refused to put us into baseball until we could make what was called the major leagues.
Okay.
So here we are, my brother and I were going to elementary school, and we're seeing all our friends, for 3 or 4 years playing in youth sports leagues. And we knew this because they were wearing their uniforms to school and talking about what teams they're on. I'm on the Red Sox, I'm on this. And we didn't really start anything until we were 9. So we felt like we got this incredibly late start. And, who knows if my dad was on to something. I put my kids in t-ball. I didn't think it was for babies.
Yeah.
It's developmental, but my dad being a macho football player from Iowa, I guess just thought, I'm not going to stick my kids in this baby version of baseball.
Right.
I want my kids, to jump in, and we really struggled at first. We were not these gifted athletes. We ended up being pretty good athletes, but for the most part, it was more about participation and being on a team. We were so happy to be on a team, and it just, Memorial Park felt like Dodger Stadium to us when we first walked into our Little League games. You get all the butterflies, and you get to play at night, which was always exciting.
Love night.
Yeah, God, isn't it great? And so those are my earliest memories. And then at the Santa Monica Boys Club, and I'm not trying to be a chauvinist there. When we were growing up, it was called the Boys Club. So it's hard for me to call it the Boys and Girls Club.
Right.
Boys Club, just, me and your dad's age, we just say Boys Club. We played basketball and flag football there from ages 9 to 13 or 14, basically 9 until high school.
Yep.
And just absolutely loved every minute of it, and each sport, taught you different lessons. For whatever reason, I was a quarterback on the football team. I was a pitcher on the baseball team. But when you got me on a basketball court as a little kid, I was
Right.
terrified to shoot because I didn't like missing.
Right.
I couldn't understand the concept of, making 1 out of 4 shots was good.
Right.
I thought like, oh my gosh, I just missed that shot. I can't shoot again for the rest of the game.
Right.
And for some reason, no coach ever took me aside and said, hey, you don't have to make every shot. But I
Right.
was just so terrified of missing in front of
Right.
everybody. And it was weird because, in baseball, I didn't mind striking out.
Mhm.
In
Right.
football, I didn't mind throwing an incomplete pass. But when I got into, they called it biddy basketball, I couldn't pull the trigger and take a shot. It was
Right.
just, it was haunting.
Right. No, I mean, as a longtime basketball player who still loves the game, it's like as good as I've become and as as I become to missing shots, I never not get scared, but like I'm always nervous of missing a shot,
Mhm.
especially if it's a good shot too. Like, it's like there's nothing I hate more than getting a wide open shot, you know, exactly where I want it. And I shoot the shot and I miss. I hate those things. So it's like, while at the same time I've grown used to it, I totally get why that could be a feeling you could experience that could, take you over to the point where you just don't shoot.
Yeah, isn't it amazing to watch the pros who can
Right.
start out 0 for 12
Right.
and they just keep shooting?
Right.
They don't let up. Like, on Kobe's bad nights,
Right.
he would just shoot, and I think they have a term for it. I think they say that they shoot their way out of it. If
Right.
they're in a slump, they shoot their way out of it.
Yep.
Which is unlike baseball. You can't hit your way out of it because you can't force an at bat right
Right.
after you strike out. You got to wait 9 more players. You got to
Right.
wait 2 or 3 innings to get another at bat. But these basketball players just shoot their way out of it,
Yep.
out of their slumps.
Well, it's like they say, it's like if you keep missing, keep shooting. Like I've known, like, I'll give a funny side story to our audience that I happen to know from the pros. There was a time where, for those of you who don't know, and maybe you don't know, Kurt, there's a guy named Danny Green who played for the longest time with the Spurs under the great coach Greg Popovich. And there was one game, I think it was in the finals, I think they were playing Miami, where Green was shooting at first, but he kept missing. And because of that, later in the game, he suddenly refused to shoot. And the other thing I'll note too about Danny Green is he prides himself on being a shooter. So it's like his greatest strength was taken away from him right there just because he simply couldn't make shots. And,
right.
While he knew that was his greatest strength, at the same time, he became so scared by the prospect of missing another shot. He simply refused to shoot again. And eventually it got to the point where Pop, I think, pulled him aside and said, dude, if you don't shoot the basketball the next time you get it, I'm going to put you on the bench. Because it's like, yes, he was missing shots, but at the same time, it's like
to win.
Right. Yeah, no. And that was the only way he could contribute. And to Pop, it was like, hey, if this guy isn't, at least trying to help us, why should I keep him out there?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure I think it's Michael Jordan who said, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Yes.
is
that
that
so
a
true.
Jordan quote?
I'm not sure if it's a Jordan quote or not, but I know it's a quote of some kind.
Yeah. And
So
it's true. I mean,
very true.
Yeah. Look at Steph Curry.
Right.
Steph Curry, if he misses 5 in a row, he just backs up further and shoots from further away.
It doesn't matter to him.
No, it doesn't.
And that's why he also always shoots those long half-court shots. He's not afraid of missing.
Yeah.
And while granted, he makes way more than the average person does, at the same time, he knows that every time he shoots it, he is taking a huge risk and potentially missing that shot. And of course, if he does miss, most people will consider that a terrible shot.
That's right. That's right.
It's like you do have to have that bravery in you if you have the guts to shoot those. So well, I'm disappointed you didn't. Obviously, nobody's perfect. But anyway, continuing on, and I guess staying with the pros for a second, I'd like to ask, again, staying with you at a young age, growing up, what teams and maybe even specific players did you idolize in any sport at all? Why was that the case?
I grew up a massive Dodger fan.
Oh,
just an unbelievable, I bleed Dodger blue.
Right.
And let me tell you what was interesting about the Dodgers back then was they had an infield of 4 guys that stayed together for 11 years.
Wow.
11 years they played together. Right during my youth, right from the time I was probably 7 or 8 to the time I was in high school, this infield stayed together.
That
And
is crazy.
nowadays, if you follow baseball, I think it's a miracle if these guys stay together for 2 or 3 years.
Right.
Like just rosters change so much nowadays.
Right.
So I grew up with these Dodger lineups that
Mhm.
were just unbelievable. Like they were just so consistent and
Right.
successful. And it wasn't the case, but it seemed like growing up, every year it was the Dodgers versus the Yankees in the World Series.
Right.
And my youth also seemed like every year was the Lakers versus the Boston Celtics.
Right.
So I grew up with these kind of dynasties
Mhm.
that I rooted for and
Yeah.
against. But yeah, it was Rams for football because they were back.
Right. They
They
were
were
in
in
LA.
LA back then. And it was Dodgers for baseball. Me and most of my friends rooted for the Lakers, but for some reason I was so fascinated with Larry Bird.
Mm.
I became a Celtics fan for junior high school just because of Larry Bird. And once
You're
he
not
got
alone. You're not alone.
once he retired, it was done.
Yep.
I went back to the Lakers, but
There you go.
yeah, it was all the LA teams, and it seemed like
Mhm.
it seemed like we had a dynasty back then.
Right.
And then of course I raised my sons as Dodgers and Lakers fans,
Right.
and then had this massive drought.
Right.
Just this year, of course.
Well,
the
not
Lakers
really for the
won it.
Lakers, but definitely for the Dodgers.
Yeah, but definitely for the Dodgers. We all rooted for the Dodgers, and to see them break the 30-year drought
Yeah.
this year was pretty
Yeah.
special. But I had friends from Boston, and
Right.
all the Boston teams were winning, and I had friends, who were Giants fans, and they win 3 out of 6 World Series, and
Right.
my poor sons had to watch all these other teams
Yeah.
win. I didn't
You see
think
the
they'd ever
Cubs
get a
win for the first
championship.
time in 116 years
Oh,
or 108.
unbelievable.
Yep.
Unbelievable. Yeah. So my youth was mostly on a professional level. It was all about the Dodgers.
Right.
Back then,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I have some ticket stubs of like pretty good seats that were $8.
Oh.
Those was back in the days before,
Right.
luxury boxes and all that stuff.
Yep.
We're professional. I think the Lakers were always super expensive.
Right.
The Dodger tickets were nothing back then.
Right.
You could get in for, get good seats for $10 or $15.
Right.
So it was incredible growing up a Dodger fan.
Yeah.
In Los Angeles.
Yeah. Well, it's funny too that you mentioned that, because I remember when I played with you, there were, I think I was playing with you, or the beach volleyball season coincided with the playoffs and
absolutely.
baseball.
Fall sport.
Right.
Yeah.
So I remember, there were times whenever they were playing and I was practicing outside your house, I'd come back in and you'd be watching them play.
Oh, I was glued to the TV.
Yes, you were. Yeah. And I guess I would actually follow up with that really quickly, and kind of just add to the question. You mentioned Larry Bird, and I guess I would ask why him, but also just like maybe example, was there anybody specific on the Dodgers who stood out to you?
Yeah. My favorite player was a guy named Steve Yeager.
Okay.
And the only reason I liked Steve Yeager was because my first baseball mitt was a Steve Yeager catcher's mitt.
Ah.
And I never even played catcher. It's just, I don't know if it's just me, but whoever signs your first glove,
right,
that's probably going to be your first favorite player.
Right.
Yeah, I liked all the Dodgers, but the one that really stood out for me was Fernando Valenzuela.
Oh, okay.
To grow up, I think I was, let's see, Fernando Mania, I believe was 1980.
Yeah.
Now, have you heard of Fernando Valenzuela?
Yes, I have.
Okay. Do you understand that he was Rookie of the Year, Cy Young, and the World Series MVP, or I'm sorry, World Series champion, all in his first year? Okay. I remember walking to school, and this is way before the internet, Keegan, way before. Right. And I remember walking past the newspaper stands.
Right.
Right. And Dodger games always ended later than, I went to bed. But I would walk past these newspaper stands, and I remember the headlines: Fernando Valenzuela 4-0, Fernando Valenzuela 9-0, Fernando Valenzuela 10-0. He took over this entire city.
Right.
I mean, if you've never seen a documentary on Fernando Mania, you should watch it.
Yep.
Because this guy, who first of all threw like nobody had ever seen before, he had this really funky wind up, and he threw I think not a split finger. Was it a slider? I forget what his out pitch was.
Right.
But he threw like nobody else you'd ever seen.
Right.
And then there was this whole thing about supposedly being 20 years old. He looked 30. Okay. Nobody will ever know how old he actually was, but
Right.
that was another layer to it. And
Right.
the fact that this Hispanic guy, who I don't remember him speaking much English at all, I mean, he hypnotized this city. And it
Uh-huh.
wasn't a racial thing. You know, it wasn't,
Right.
everybody loved Fernando Valenzuela. You
Right.
know, so to see him, to see a player that even other fans in other cities were following,
Hmm.
he was an absolute phenomenon. And it came at the perfect time when I was 10 years old, right after I'd
Right.
started playing baseball.
Right.
So Fernando Mania to me probably is really
Yeah.
what made me fall in love with baseball and want to become a pitcher.
Yeah.
It was quite a scene in Los
Yeah.
Angeles.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned going to bed before games were over, but then waking up the next morning, walking to school and seeing the newspapers with the headlines. Because for me, while I did grow up only with very little time before the internet, completely took over everybody's lives, I do remember for a brief period when I was really little, how, because in case you don't know, I'm a diehard Clippers fan. I remember how I'd always like watching their games. And obviously, because I was so little, I had to go to bed before they were over. But I always remember the first thing I would do when I got up every morning was I would ask my mom for the morning
Yeah.
newspaper so I could go look at the score from the previous night's game.
That's great.
Oh,
That's great.
yeah.
So
No.
you can empathize with my sons. You're a long-suffering Clipper fan,
Yes.
and while they haven't won a championship, you've seen them grow into a contender. An
Yes.
exciting team to watch.
Again, it's another scenario where I happen to grow up in a time where they finally started to become good.
Yeah. Now,
So
do you remember the Clippers being a joke?
Honestly, no.
Or
I mean,
were
I
they
do.
pretty good by the time
I mean, I might remember one or two seasons before they started consistently making the playoffs, but only one or two.
I think Elton Brand turned it all around, right?
Yeah, no.
That team.
Although what's weird is I don't even remember Elton Brand being on the Clippers. So.
Oh, okay. So you probably, because I guess probably
I mean,
before you
honestly,
started following them, they were a joke. I mean,
right.
It's hard to describe. I can't think of another team
Right.
that was that bad for that long. Like, how in football, I guess you have the Cleveland Browns who are actually good now.
Right.
But I guess that the closest thing would be the Cleveland Browns, where you just, when somebody's traded to that team, you just go, oh, we'll never hear from him again.
Right.
But then Elton Brand came along and I think turned them into a play, not a contender, but,
Right.
got them into the playoffs a couple times. Yeah. Baron Davis was an exciting Clipper for a while.
Yep. I think I first started remembering watching them, ironically, when Blake Griffin came around.
Yeah, well, that's Lob City.
Right.
I mean, by then that was that was almost like Fernando Mania. I mean, you had Lakers fans all of a sudden watching Clippers games because it was so exciting.
Right.
With Chris Paul and Blake Griffin. I mean, that Lob City stuff was certainly an absolute pleasure to watch, even if you weren't a fan.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I guess kind of going a little further off of that, obviously you mentioned you grew up in Santa Monica like me. And and what I'm asking is, when you were, at that age, a child, a young adult, whatever, what do you think were some of your proudest moments? Like I mentioned first moments, but what were moments you were more proud of?
Let's see. If you're talking about youth sports, I hit a grand slam in an all-star game that I can still remember the pitch coming. I mean, like,
of course you can.
Yeah, like there aren't too many times where I could actually remember everything about a play, but I remember hitting a grand slam in an all-star game, and I remember just every detail.
I can relate to you.
Moment.
I can relate to you. I remember hitting a game-winning free throw.
Yeah, I see. I don't think there's anything like a walk-off. Like
nothing.
Like I never, because I told you I wasn't very good at basketball because of my I was too terrified to shoot. But I would imagine hitting a game-winning shot must be. Well, I don't know how you could ever forget it.
Oh no, you can't. It's true. It's the simple truth. You can't.
It's just So I would say I'd say I had a grand slam when I was little. There were a couple of football plays, some perfect passes I remember throwing.
Right.
And then when I got into high school, in one game I threw a no-hitter and hit a home run.
There you go.
Of course,
That's
I
nice.
remember all that and stuff like that, and some of my better pitching performances in high school.
Hmm.
But for the most part, the memories of the plays don't stay. It's the teammates that you
Right.
remember.
Oh,
Like, oh,
absolutely. Like,
that was a crazy team, and I remember this kid and stuff like that. And
oh,
that was a really good team. Or sometimes you say, "Oh my gosh, I was on the worst team you've ever seen." Those memories stick out.
yeah,
But
no.
you end up forgetting most of the plays.
Right.
Like imagine these NBA guys.
Hmm.
Steph Curry's probably hit too many game winners to remember.
Right.
Like I'd be curious to know if he remembers all his walk
Yeah,
offs.
no.
You know,
Well, it's weird actually, because I feel like I remember hearing a story about how he remembers actually a lot of the plays he's committed in his NBA career.
no
So,
kidding.
I mean, obviously, I'm only speaking from what little knowledge I know, but go look it up online. I'm sure.
Well, listen, Keegan, when you have him on your podcast, you can quiz him. You could
Yes.
say,
No.
"Tell me what happened this date, this date." You could see if he remembers the
Absolutely.
game-winning shot in Denver.
Absolutely. I will definitely challenge him. I'll challenge him to remember all the times he lost the ball in the final
Yes,
seconds,
exactly.
because I actually
Yes.
know too,
Oh,
out of
that would be
randomness.
interesting too.
So, oh, that's funny. Oh, that's great though. Um, and I guess kind of closing this phase of questions. Obviously, it sounds like sports were very important to you,
Oh yeah.
especially when you were young. And why was that the case that they were so important to you at such a young age?
Probably because of my jock father. I probably felt like this is what we bonded over.
Hmm.
My father never really asked me what I learned in school. He was very concerned about my grades, but
Right.
he never sat down and said, "What'd you learn today?" or "What are you learning about?" or anything like that.
Right.
But the sports were such a big deal to him that they became a big deal to
Hmm.
my brother and myself.
Hmm.
You know, um, and plus, and this is what I tell a lot of parents. I'm a kindergarten teacher. I tell the parents in their conferences
Right.
is, your son's happiness is probably going to be dictated by his athletic ability in high school. I mean, it's sad.
Right.
Look, your kid could be, a straight A student, but that's not going to get him high fives in the hallway.
Right.
But if he's the quarterback of the football team, okay.
Right.
And in elementary school, it's all about handball.
Right.
How good you are in the handball line, and all
I
that stuff.
I remember those days.
Yeah, and so I encourage the parents to really focus on their kids' athleticism, as well as their academics, just because it leads to the kids' happiness. And that's the way
Yep.
I was. I was a very confident, I wouldn't say cocky, but I was a confident kid because I was an all-around athlete.
Right.
And
Yep.
that was back in the days before, in my opinion, before club sports ruined youth sports.
Right.
Nowadays, you've got so many, especially in Santa Monica, such a baseball crazy town,
Right.
so many kids who play baseball year round.
Right.
When I was growing up, you played football in the fall, you played
Right.
basketball in the winter, and you played baseball in the spring. You
Right.
know, I think soccer was a winter sport.
It was in there. I mean,
Yeah, it
it's
was
like,
in there somewhere. So a lot of
yeah.
kids did that too. But you did all of them. I mean, you didn't, there was absolutely no opportunity to play baseball year round. Nobody
Right.
was playing.
Right.
So my generation, like I just think bred a lot more all around athletes as
Yeah.
opposed to these club programs that will tell the parents, okay, but if your kid doesn't play year round, everybody's going to pass him by. And they scare the parents into thinking that they have to focus
Right.
on one sport at 10 years old.
Right.
And, all these big college coaches,
Hmm.
they all say they want all around athletes. They want,
Right.
they want the kids playing different sports.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, I've told girls on the beach volleyball team,
Right.
that, hey, if you really want to play D1 college beach volleyball, you should probably play year round.
Right.
Like I feel like a hypocrite saying it, but it's the
Right.
truth. Like some of these girls that maybe are not as athletic as they could be need to
Right.
focus on it. At some point, you have to focus on a sport if you want to play at the next level.
Right.
And as much as I wish everybody could play year round,
Right.
multi sports, at some point in high school, usually you're going to have to really focus unless you're the next Bo Jackson
Hmm.
or something.
Right.
Because, I know these college coaches, they talk a big game about wanting multi sport athletes.
Right.
It's not like they cut you any slack. If you say,
Right.
yeah, but I don't play baseball year round. You know,
Right.
they're not going to say, "Oh, then I'll recruit you."
Right.
No, they're going to recruit the best players they can.
Right.
Um, and so that's one thing that that's really changed since I was a kid, was this club sports phenomenon where, like, when these baseball players get out of college,
Mhm.
not most of them, a lot of them go back to their hometown and they start a club baseball program.
Right.
That that job, that profession did not exist when I was a kid. Okay, you know
Right.
who coached me in Little League? My dad or our plumber. Like, these were not ex-college guys who were making money at it. It was some guy's dad,
Right.
that coached all these teams.
Yeah.
But nowadays, you've got all these clubs coaches who are, usually extremely good coaches because they played at a high level,
Right.
you know, but it's their profession,
Right.
which makes it a completely different thing than a volunteer coach,
Mhm.
just getting out there and having fun. There's
Right.
just so much more pressure for the kids now, even in these younger ages.
Mhm. Yeah, no. I can
Did you go
definitely
through club basketball?
I actually, well, yes and no. I played in a league for the longest time, and my audience knows this because they've watched my previous episodes. I played in a basketball league at the YMCA for the longest time, and that was year round.
Which Y?
Santa Monica.
Oh, Santa Monica Y. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was year round, but it wasn't a club team. It was a rec league. So,
Okay.
It's like yes and no. I mean, I guess is my answer to your question.
Yeah.
More yes, but it's like whatever. So and that was mostly actually because not necessarily because I wanted to play another sport. That was the only sport I was interested in at the time.
Yeah, right.
So it wasn't even necessarily a case where I was forced into it. But anyway, I guess I'll turn to the present more instead of the past. And it seems like, at least based on what I know of you, you're still incredibly active. You coach volleyball and play it very well still too, and you also play other sports. Apparently, based on what I'm reading off here, it says you play golf and pickleball. And let me ask quickly, what even is pickleball? Because
I don't really don't know what pickleball is.
I mean, I do, but I don't think our audience does.
Okay, pickleball is paddle tennis.
Okay.
Somebody was playing paddle tennis someday, and I think they forgot the tennis balls and had a wiffle ball in their bag. And they said, "Let's play with this wiffle ball and change a couple rules," and pickleball was born.
There you go.
Pickleball is paddle tennis, and what you'll notice if you ever go to a pickleball court is I would say the average age is about 70 years old. Like, this is a sport for ex-tennis players.
Right.
Okay. Like, it's up and coming. It's becoming younger.
Right.
But more often than not, what you're seeing on the pickleball court is people who can no longer cover a whole tennis court by themselves.
Right.
They transition to pickleball, and it's just, it's fast, it's fun, it's like ping pong, but you're standing on the table. Like, so I play that. I play golf all the time. Yeah, you said, beach volleyball. I'm pretty active.
All right. Well, let me get back to the question I was asking, which was basically, how did you get involved with these, especially pickleball? I mean, come on, man.
Yeah. Well, we have a place out in the desert, so when you're out in the desert with all these retired people, pickleball comes naturally. It's hard to not play pickleball when you're out there. I took up golf, I don't know, I think maybe 15 or 20 years ago, which, like, you remember when I said 9 was late for starting baseball. I didn't start playing golf until I was in my 30s, which allows me to say, oh, I started late in life. 20 years later, I'm kind of still a beginner, because most 50-year-olds who were golfing have been golfing since they were 10, or something like that. And then, just getting out there and playing as much beach volleyball as I can. I try to do something active every day.
Right.
Being a teacher, getting off work early, has allowed me the possibility to do that and try to stay active. And you Keegan, I'm warning you, the hard part about being an athlete later in life is finding other people to play with. Because most people work 9 to 5.
Right.
And it's very hard to find somebody to play golf or pickleball or volleyball with at 2 in the afternoon.
Right. And also one that won't beat you because they're so much younger than you.
That's right. That's right.
So it's like, you got to consider that. I guess I would also just add on quickly. What about these like sports appealed to you?
Well, let's see.
Because you mentioned it's hard to find players too. So it's like, what kept you in it?
beach volleyball. I grew up playing beach volleyball because I grew up on the beach in Santa Monica.
Right.
I've just always loved the 2-on-2 aspect of it,
Right.
where it's a team sport,
Mm-hmm.
but unlike baseball and basketball, you touch the ball every rally.
Yeah.
Like like I said, I was a pitcher at
Right.
UCLA,
Right.
and I used to look in the outfield and
Mm.
just look at these guys standing around doing nothing, going, how can you just stand there? Like,
Yeah.
how can you just stand there
Right.
and maybe get the ball hit to you 2, maybe 3 times a game? I
Right.
just didn't understand, and you
Yeah.
get 3 at bats a game. I never understood how they had the attention span to do that.
And I'll just say quickly, I didn't understand it either, and I do endure it.
Right. Like I tell these parents, I say, yeah, go ahead and put your kid in baseball, but I'm warning you, it's the most boring sport in the world unless you're pitching and catching. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know how people do it. Um, and then basketball, unlike the other sports that I play, man, I just can't stand ball hogs, man. I just
Neither
can't
can I.
take it.
Neither can I.
Like I just every 5 years or so, I get roped into playing some kind of basketball game with a bunch of older guys or younger guys. I don't know. And there's
Mhm.
always one guy on the team who's such a ball hog. He absolutely ruins it for me, and I
Right.
never want to play again.
Right.
So, and then golf. What I like about it is that you really play against yourself.
Right.
You can go out with 3 other friends like I did today, and depending on your handicap, you give each other strokes. You say, you're really good, so you're going to give me a stroke a hole or something like that.
Right.
But ultimately, you're really just playing against yourself in golf. And
Right.
that really intrigued me when I
Yeah.
started golfing, was just watching yourself improve,
Yeah. No, I
just
mean,
through practice.
right. I mean, unlike other sports, you're right. Golf is one of the very few sports where your biggest opponent is yourself. It's not
Absolutely.
other people. It's like,
Absolutely.
it's like at the end of the day, that is one of the very few sports where you have total control over your own
Total control.
situation.
Yeah, no excuses. You can't blame, a bad set or a bad pass or something like that on a teammate. If
Right.
you blow a shot, it's all on you,
Right.
and because I had the time to put a lot of effort into the sport,
Right.
it's truly like, if you're practicing with any kind of purpose, you
Mhm.
will get better. That's all
Yes.
there is to it.
Yes.
Other sports, not so much. Like some people are just not coordinated enough to shoot a basketball.
Yes.
And all the practice in the world isn't really going to help them that much.
Right.
But golf, because the ball's not moving when you
Right.
hit it, you don't have to jump in the air when you're hitting it or anything like that.
Yep.
You can really not. And that's one of the great things, is you can never master it, but you're always going to improve.
Right.
And
No.
then, like we talked about pickleball. Pickleball was just this great transition from being a tennis player to, okay, I can't run that much in one day.
Right.
I need a sport that's just like this without the running, and
Right.
boom, there's pickleball.
There you go. It's sometimes it is that simple.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, absolutely. So actually, I'm gonna kind of shift gears here pretty quickly. Actually, I'm actually gonna do something I haven't done before, which is I'm gonna get into the spectrum aspect of a little bit of it. This show a little more quickly than I usually do. And the first thing I'm gonna ask is, you shared, and I also just mentioned it at the very beginning of the show, that you have ADHD, which is, in case our audience doesn't know, is short for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And I'll also quickly read out a definition of it just to give us a little more context here. So ADHD is one of the most common neurodevelopmental disorders of childhood, is usually first diagnosed in childhood and often lasts into adulthood. Children with ADHD may have trouble paying attention, controlling impulsive behaviors, may act without thinking about what the result will be, or may be overly active. Now, I'm not going to put words in your mouth or anything like that, but I'm assuming that kind of fits the bill in a way of what you've had to deal with since you do have ADHD. But I guess I'd like to have you be the real storyteller here about what that is like for you. And I guess I'll just ask basically a simple question. How does this affect you? And what does it feel like for you?
The way I describe my ADD is when I'm sitting on the couch at night watching TV.
Mhm.
Okay. I'm watching TV.
Right.
I have my laptop on my computer.
Right.
And sometimes I'm even listening to a podcast. So that's what it's like to be ADD to me, is the world, there's not enough stimulus.
Right.
Like staring at one screen barely does it for me.
Right.
I need to be staring at two different screens and listening to something else, and then it's relaxing for me.
Right.
And it's weird. My ADD, as far as I know, really didn't kick in until I was in college.
Right.
In high school, I was able to lock in on my teachers and get straight A's. It was never a problem for me to focus in class. And then I got to UCLA. Now, maybe it was because I was in a lecture hall with 300 kids, as opposed to a classroom with 30 kids and stuff like that.
Right.
But all of a sudden, I couldn't focus anymore. All of a sudden, I'm doodling on paper. It's, again, this is before cell phones and the internet.
Right.
I'm doodling on papers. I'm reading books in class while the lecture's going on, doing all these things. And it just wasn't enough stimulus for me. I think also, that's kind of why I gravitated towards the sports I've gravitated to. They kind of feed my ADD. They keep my attention going. Like I said, standing in the outfield, I couldn't do it.
Right.
I just, there's no way you could have me stand in the outfield for 4 hours and just maybe two balls would get hit at me. So that's the way I describe ADD. It's just a need for a tremendous amount of stimuli coming at you from different directions and being able to handle it.
Right. And it's actually really interesting that you say all of that, because believe it or not, this is a wild coincidence. Before I got to talking with you, I was actually watching a recording of the play Hamilton, which talks about the life of one of the founding fathers of the U.S., Alexander Hamilton. And what I find interesting here, talking about what you've had to endure with ADHD and what he's had to endure in his life, is it honestly wouldn't shock me maybe if he himself had to deal with that. And of course, he just didn't know it. Because for those who have seen the play or know what it's about, one of the things I find most interesting about him, just going off topic a little bit here, is that he never wanted to stand on the sidelines. He always wanted to do something.
Right.
I mean, in the play, I'll read off the words of the play itself. He was never satisfied.
Yeah. Remember what he was doing, what his widow said after his death. She found out that he was always writing. Like he never stopped writing. Right. Every thought that came into his head, he wrote down. Right. And I think that's probably how ADD manifested itself, before TV and the internet and cell phones and stuff like that. Probably a lot of these people ended up writing tremendous amounts of material.
Right. Just because that was the only thing they could do to stay active. You know, it was just like they just could not stop themselves from doing what they thought was right. And I think that's also part of the reason why he liked being, right all the time too. It's like he couldn't stand the idea of all these other people having all these other different opinions that he didn't agree with.
Absolutely.
He just had to get his word out when he could. And I think that's
And really so my ADD, what it did, I also think is that's the reason I'm a kindergarten teacher.
Right.
It's the perfect job for somebody who's ADD. Right. Because my attention span is
as short as the kindergartners.
Longer than the kids. It's like 2 minutes longer than the kids. So in my classroom, everything changes every 15 minutes. The kids change from table to table every 15 minutes. So what I did was I took this, what some people would consider, a disability or whatever, and said, what would be a good profession for this? I tried designing video games right out of college. Right. And it was the greatest job in the world. I was getting paid by Sony to design and produce video games. Yep. But it turns out I couldn't be in a cubicle from 9 to 5. No, it was like a prison sentence. By 1 o'clock, I was going, I have to be here for 4 more hours. I couldn't take it. Right. I just couldn't take it. So I became a teacher and found, that the kindergarten one allowed me to be extremely creative. Right. But because, every day is different than the next. You never know what's going to happen 10 minutes from now. Right. It just, it really suited my personality and what I needed out of life, which was constant movement, constant stimuli. Yeah. You're never going to walk into a kindergarten classroom and say, oh, this is so quiet. Right. This is nonstop stimuli.
Yeah, no. And I mean, honestly, obviously, I know I've don't have ADHD or something like that, but I do still have autism. And I think, I guess ADHD and autism share a similarity in the sense, or maybe this might be just me having some effects of it, where it's like, I can't stand still for long periods of time. Like literally there are points where it's like, I'm sitting down in a class in school and I'll ask the teacher, it's like, I need to go outside in the hallway for a second and pace. Yeah. And like whenever I'm thinking too about an assignment or something like that, I usually like to do it while I'm pacing.
Yeah.
It's that simple. It's like, I can't focus unless I'm moving my body or something like that.
Well, and so isn't that great that we both found beach volleyball?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to wonder when the next time you're going to touch the ball is.
Right.
It's every rally. Yep. There's no bench to sit on. You're not worried about a coach taking you out and putting you back in. Every single play, you're touching the ball.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? So,
and I think that's what made me fall in love with it so much too. It's like, I knew that I could be a big part of it fairly easily just by being in the game,
Yeah.
It's like,
and look at, it's closest cousin there, indoor volleyball.
Right.
You could easily, especially you being a middle blocker, you could go 5-6 rallies without ever touching the ball easily. Right. Yep. I mean, you're just putting your hands up at the net to block every time, hoping somebody hits it into your hands. Right. But as the middle blocker, you're not passing. Right. You're not setting. You're just praying that they get off a perfect pass that you can actually hit a ball, that the center will set you.
Yep. And it's like oftentimes too, the middle blocker gets set to the least, I'm sure.
Oh, no doubt. Because it takes a perfect pass to set the middle, right?
Exactly.
Otherwise, you're setting the pins every single time.
Right. No, I totally agree. I guess I would quickly ask a few quick follow-ups to kind of build off what you said earlier about dealing with ADHD. And I guess I'll mention all three here and hope you can answer them in one cohesive answer, but no, not trying to stress you out here. First of all, did it change for you getting older? What compared to when you were first were diagnosed in college compared to now, basically, now that you're a kindergarten teacher and all. Mm-hmm. And then do you feel it often? Like how often do you feel? And give me kind of an estimate of what that does to you. And then also, are there any specific instances or circumstances or situations, whatever, where it can appear more or seem more evident is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I would say it has not evolved at all since I first noticed it in college.
Right.
I've been just as ADD as I have been for the last 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's getting any better. I don't think it's getting any worse.
Right.
There's nothing that calms me. There's nothing that makes it go away.
Right.
Sleep patterns, eating habits, none of it. It's always there. So to answer your second question,
right,
it's always there. It is. My mind is never at rest.
Right.
In the middle of a beach volleyball game, I'm thinking about, what I have to do that night to prep for the next day of kindergarten.
Right.
It's just the mind never, ever, ever sits still.
Mm-hmm.
And then what was the third question?
The third question was like, are there any specific situations or scenarios where it can be more evident that you're dealing with it or not, or where it is to you?
I would say, there's instances where my wife points out my ADD.
Okay.
And just says, wow,
right.
That must be rough. Like she sees me, again, on the watching TV, she'll come home.
Right.
And I'm watching TV. I'm on the laptop and I'm listening to something else at the same time. And I've probably got music playing in the background.
Right.
And she just goes, is this what it's like? Like, is this? And I go, yes, this is what it's like being ADD. This is calming to me because she can't take two of those things. Like she barely likes having the TV on. And when she does, it's at a really low level, volume wise. So to have four things coming at her, it's just not an option.
Yeah.
So that's probably when it gets pointed out the most, is when she goes, man, this is really different for me.
I would also say this: you probably have the biggest electrical bill in the city.
It's up there.
If you're running so much. I guess kind of staying in the casual aspect of things, does it come up more? I guess what I would ask here is, how proactively or how open are you about this, I guess is what I would ask. And like, is it something like if somebody asks you about something like this, you know, do you ever try to hide it or deny it, whatever? It's like,
No.
what's your approach to sharing it with the world, I guess is my
Yeah.
question.
So I tell my parents at back to school night, you know, when they meet me, you know,
Okay.
I tell them the exact same thing I told you. I said, I'm highly ADD. I have
Right.
attention span that's 1 minute longer than your 5-year-olds.
Right.
So this is the perfect job for me.
Right.
Now, ADD and ADHD, in my opinion, have never had a negative connotation.
No, and I don't think
There's
they do
never
either.
there's never been a stigma attached to it. Now, when I was growing up, teachers would call kids hyper. Okay.
Right.
That wasn't a good thing. You know, that
No.
wasn't a compliment. That just meant your kid can't sit still. Okay.
Right.
And I think what that really was, you know, a 1970s way of saying your kid is ADD, you know, or your kid is ADHD. They were just called hyper, you know, and
Right.
second you meet a hyper kid, you know why they were called hyper. But
Right.
even then, it wasn't this negative. There was never this stigma because parents, in my opinion, have never been afraid of having their kids diagnosed as ADD.
Right.
You know, I think parents, I do think that, not that there's a negative stigma to autism, but parents, it's not something parents want to hear. You know, like you're not hoping for an autism, you know, diagnosis when your kid goes to the doctor. But I don't think anybody ever negatively stigmatized ADD. So I'm perfectly happy to tell complete strangers, if I playing with somebody, playing golf with somebody, and sometimes I'll say, hey, I'm ADD, and I might have my earplugs in when I'm golfing, or I might be on my phone in between shots. It's just what I do. Nobody cares. Yeah. Everybody's very forgiving when it comes to saying that. I'm not telling them something that's, in my opinion, super personal. I'm just saying, hey, if I wander off in the middle of a conversation or something like that, this is why. Yeah. And one of the things I ask the parents is, to keep their emails to me short. The shorter they are, the more likely I am to read them. Right. And pay attention. If they're going to write me a 6-page essay on, what happened to their kid at school that day, it's going to be rough for me to get through. Right. Yeah, no. But yeah, I think I'm very, very open about being ADD. Yeah. Yeah, no. And I mean, I guess for me, and I'm not trying to compare or differentiate the two here, for me, having autism, I'm not as open about it. And it's not because I don't want to be. It's just because, again, to me, it's like, well, if people aren't asking, why should I tell them, So it's like, and it's like, if they did ask me, of course, I'd be honest with them at all and open and not feel bad about it in any way. But, to me, it's like, it's something that's like, if it doesn't have to come up, it doesn't need to come up, It's like, so it's like, it's kind of like that. But I guess trying to connect the two now at this point, how did sports specifically help you deal with those kinds of challenges you mentioned and, effects that ADHD has had on you, or ADD, whatever you want to call it? What did it do to help you both better understand it and address, everything associated with that? Yeah, I'd say more than anything, it keeps me busy. Right. The sports keep me busy. Like I said, I just need a tremendous amount of stimulus in my life. Right. And the sports I play in the afternoons or nights, whenever I'm playing them, they give me lots and lots of stimulus. Not only do they give me stimulus then, but my golf rounds at night, the last thing I think about before I fall asleep is every single shot I took in order. That's how, that's my version of counting sheep. Yeah, no. And same with volleyball or pickleball. I can replay the matches in my head to help me fall asleep. Right. Because that's another thing about being ADD is when you're awake, you are awake. You need to you need something calming to fall asleep to, and that's what, sports has done for me is it provides me an outlet, and then it also gives me something to practice when I'm not, playing, when I can't find anyone to play with. I could always practice golf by myself. And it gives me something to look forward to, like I said, I need all this stimulus during the day. There's plenty of times during the day where I find myself predicting my golf shots or my volleyball match or something like that throughout the day. And I think, one thing in especially pickleball and volleyball is it's a huge advantage to know where the ball is about to be hit.
Right.
Okay. So, right, like I think I used to teach you, don't cover a part of the court that they can't hit it to,
Right.
and it's all about predictability.
Right.
And I think that that's possibly where ADD helps me in sports because my mind never, ever shuts off.
Right.
I'm always telling my volleyball players, you should learn something from every rally.
Right.
Okay. Learn where so-and-so just hit that ball and remember where his misses were.
Right.
And force him to hit the ball where he doesn't want to hit it.
Right.
Yeah,
no.
And I think a mind that's never at rest
can
think about these things better than a mind that is at rest. I'm sure there are some very zen players out there who are not constantly thinking, okay, he just hit 2 balls out down the line. I'm going to force him to hit line every time. So I think ADD, if you find the right sport, it can really help you. And to me, that's the key. Have you ever heard of Jack Dempsey?
That name does ring a bell.
So he was a kid who was born with a club foot. Okay. So that pretty much immediately took him out of most sports.
Right.
You can't run and keep up with everybody with a club foot.
Right.
So you know what he became? The single greatest. No, that's another Dempsey.
Okay.
He became the greatest field goal kicker of all time.
Oh.
He kicked a 64-yard field goal, and this was back in the 50s or 60s. Okay.
Right, when it was ridiculous.
He had a long field goal. I believe the record stood until a year or two ago when some guy in Miami that you never heard of kicked a 65-yarder. Okay.
Right.
But that's a good example of a guy who probably with the help of his dad said, okay, I have a club foot and I love sports. What could I do with it?
Right.
And they found him the perfect outlet. You can kick a ball further than anybody else because of your club foot. And so a lot of times when, kids have certain issues or something like that, I'll actually sit down with the parents in kindergarten and go, okay, what aspects of your child could benefit them later in sports? If they're tall, obviously volleyball or basketball. If they're fast, probably soccer or, another, lacrosse or something where speed is king. Right. But it's the same with, different abilities.
Yeah.
If your kid is ADD, I have some good sports for you. I can recommend some sports that their ADD might actually feed into it. Or, it's not going to be long before we see an autistic superstar. Do any names come to mind when you say autism in sports? Has there been one?
I mean, no, but it wouldn't shock me if one does come along at the same time.
Eventually somebody's going to come along and be a poster boy. There was a famous running back a few years ago named Ricky Williams. And he had, I don't know the name of it, but he had some social anxiety disorder where he had to do his interviews after the game with his helmet on. He didn't like, I don't think it was the eye contact. I'm not sure what it was.
Right.
But he was lambasted by the press for being a prima donna for not taking his helmet off during these interviews. And it turns out he had this social disorder.
Right.
And everybody just crushed him for it, So yeah, I think, I can't wait to see, an autistic superstar. Who's going to really be the poster child for all the autistic kids out there and say, you can do this.
Right. No. And I mean, I can relate to what Ricky was thinking, because it's like, sometimes this isn't a common trend for me, because I've learned to deal with it better, but sometimes I'll like to wear sunglasses, when I'm out outside or whatever and talking to other people, just because, it then allows me to see them clearly, but they don't have to see me per se,
Yep. And meanwhile, if you were to wear those same sunglasses inside, people would think you were rude.
Right.
Or a prima donna or a rock star. You think you're a rock star or something,
Right.
But I think the world, I think society's changing.
Right.
I think all the attitudes on mental health are changing incredibly. I think we've made tremendous strides in the last few years when it comes to recognizing mental health issues.
Right. No, I think so too. And I definitely think it'll only continue to get better.
Yeah.
So I think actually I'm gonna try and give our audience a little more background into how we know each other personally, thanks to me playing for your team. But before we do that, I'd like to give a shout out to one of our sponsors.
Do you own a classic Mustang, Corvette, Camaro, or Chevelle from the 1960s or 70s? Does the clock in your dash keep accurate time? Do you want to get a new clock for your car, but you don't want to pay $200, $300, or even $500 for a new clock? Well, then go to ImpactAutoPartsStore.com for a brand new quartz clock that looks identical to the original and is powered by a single AA battery. All at prices less than half that of a restored clock or a reproduction. Go to the website, ImpactAutoPartsStore.com, and keep on cruising.
And so, first I want to discuss basically what it was like for me playing on your team and playing on the beach. And I actually have a picture here to show you to kind of bring back some memories to that for both of us. And also, learning from your other experiences playing with other high school athletes too. So this I have right here is a picture of our entire beach volleyball team for the year that I played, where you're on one side of the picture wearing your big, what do you call those?
Beach hat. I don't know.
Yeah, beach hat, basically. And then I'm on, ironically, the other side. We're both on the edges there, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, and it's just like, I think that kind of does a good job of kind of showing what exactly it was like for me being on a team, that while, yes, we played in twos, it's like we were all together. We all learned from each other, and you let us all there. It's like you were always the commander in chief. We all knew that. And at the same time, we all respected that from you.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you what I remember you being a very good teammate.
Right.
Like the sport of beach volleyball, unlike doubles tennis or anything like that, you're actually touching the ball 3 times on the same rally. In doubles tennis, you're just whacking the ball over. You're not really, teamed up with your partner hitting the ball to each other. So you really have to be in sync. And I remember I always used to tell you guys, look, you need to be a good partner because you're either making your partner better or you're making them worse. Like if you're rolling your eyes or saying, why didn't you get that? Or why didn't you go for that? You're making your partner worse. You know? Now, some partners need to be yelled at. Some partners need to be stroked and coddled, and you were always very good at realizing what your partner needed. Now I will say your partners didn't always know what you needed. You know what I mean? Like you weren't your typical beach volleyball player who was boisterous and macho. You were more introverted and you expected everybody else to try as hard as you were trying. You were going all out. Like I remember sometimes I was worried that you were going to run into the pole. You were running so hard after these balls. I thought this kid's going to go head first into the pole trying to get some of these balls.
Yep. And I wouldn't have been afraid if that happened,
Yeah, I know. It's truly a team sport where, you're either lifting up your partner or pushing him down, And you were always very good at lifting your partner up, you were always supportive of your partner. Rolling your eyes when they made a mistake or anything like that. How did you feel out there? Did you feel like you were comfortable?
I definitely felt comfortable. And I think part of the reason why, and I appreciate the compliment, but at the same time, I can understand why you said that about me being a good teammate. I think part of the reason for that was I was never afraid of disappointing myself in a way, simply because, it's like I kind of saw myself as always trying to be as good as my other partner. So it's like at the same time, I was never afraid because I kind of always look myself as the worst player, even if maybe that wasn't always the case.
Let me tell you something. Let me interrupt you there. You were by far not the worst. And what I thought made you an interesting player was because half the time you were playing with somebody better than you, and half the time you were playing with somebody worse than you. You know what I mean? Like it's easy to be the worst on the team. Everybody's better than you. The expectations are low. It's easy to be the best on the team. Okay. What's hard is to be in the middle. And, because we were changing partners so often, sometimes you're playing with somebody better. Sometimes you're playing with somebody worse, and you just got to make the adjustment.
No. And I think that kind of made me become such a good teammate because at the same time, I realized that, it's like, okay, everybody's going to be different. But at the same time, I think, especially coming from the experience of being with guys worse, I was always looking to pull them up. And I guess maybe because I'm such a humble person in general, that never necessarily changed. Even when I was playing with a better player, I was always looking to not make them feel bad about themselves.
Absolutely.
And at the same time too, it's like, as a better player, it's like you don't want to feel disappointed in yourself. So when they got to play with guys like me, I'm sure they were like, wow, it's like this kid, it's like while he may not be as good as me, at the same time, he at least takes responsibility for what he needs to take responsibility for. And even sometimes he'll always bring me up. So it's like, I think
and that's one of the ironic things about being a beach volleyball partner is if your partner isn't playing well, okay, being disappointed in him is usually going to make it worse.
Right.
Like I never understood these volleyball players who get on their partners and yell at them and put all these pressure on them. I'm just looking at them going, man, you're just making it worse. Now your partner's nervous.
Right.
You're actively making him worse.
Right.
And now you're even going to get more frustrated as opposed to just saying, hey, we got this next one. I know, I know we're going to side out this next one or something like that.
Yeah. And I won't lie and say I did feel that sometimes, but unlike those other guys, I had the willingness to hide it from them.
Of course.
Because I didn't want to hurt their feelings, because I know it's like, if somebody said that to me, how would I feel?
Right.
So it's like, I think that kind of helped in a sense.
Absolutely.
And, ironically, talking about how great this was, I think probably one of the most interesting things, and I don't think even this too, playing beach volleyball is way more of a coincidence than it seems. Because here's the thing, and here's some of the reasons why I came to it in the first place, which, again, I don't think a lot of people even know. And first I'll start by saying this, which is I played in my sophomore year and only my sophomore year, and I would have played more if I had not left for another school.
Well, and you realize you were going to come play for us this year.
Right.
Even though you weren't at Samohi, I was going to let you on the Samohi team. Nobody needed to know.
Right. Nope. And nobody does. But, it's like I only started playing my sophomore year. And what happened my freshman year was I was hoping to play both on the indoor basketball team and the indoor volleyball team. And I tried out for both of those. I didn't get it. And so I actually turned to both cross country and track and field, just because, unlike beach volleyball, at the time at least, I had some experience in both of those fields and thought, well, it's pretty easy to learn. The only question is, how good can I get, really?
Right.
So, and playing in my freshman year for both those teams, that was nice. It was a great experience, and I'll treasure it for every day I live. But at the same time, I think the biggest issue with it, and, I don't blame anybody for this, because this is just the nature of the sport. And it's something you talked about. It's like, you got to find the right sport for you, and not everybody has the same sport. And for me, I think what cross country and track and field lacked for me that didn't make it as good as I wanted it to be compared to beach volleyball, for example, was that because I had autism, I used sports as sort of a way to get my social and interaction level up, because as a person who has autism, that's something I struggle with. And in sports like volleyball and basketball and beach volleyball, that works really well. But in cross country and track field, not so much.
Yeah.
Because, the teammate, while you are on a team and your points come together, at the same time, you're not necessarily competing as a team, because at the end of the day, you're the individual runner, and you're not really working off of your teammates, and not have a game plan or whatever. And again, this is not any offense to them or anything, because this is something they simply can't control. But, it's like, I think that was kind of one of the challenges, that one of the things that made me want to step away from it and try something else like beach volleyball. And then, again, I also mentioned the fact that I wanted to play basketball and indoor volleyball, didn't make those teams. That was frustrating, but I won't get into the specifics of that.
Well, and don't forget, one of the biggest advantages of beach volleyball is that you can play for the rest of your life.
Exactly.
Unlike football and cross country, I know you can run, but you can't run in a cross country meet whenever you want, but football, basketball, baseball, once you graduate from high school, most people never play again.
Right.
That's it. That's your whole career. But if you take up sports like golf, tennis, beach volleyball, you can play until you're 80 or 90.
Yep.
And you don't need to rent out a facility. Just grab 3 friends and go,
Yep, exactly. Yeah. I mean, and for you were lucky too, because it's like you said, you lived down the beach, so you could just go out every day and just play. And, it's like, I'm honestly legitimately jealous of that. But, it's like, at the same time, I am happy that you get that chance. But, and I guess I'll just add quickly too, the fact of the matter was, when I found out that, beach volleyball was an option for me too, it was really nice to have this idea in my head of coming to a place that I had no prior knowledge of, no real experience in, but, you know, at the same time, getting this whole new thing that seemed really interesting to me, you know, and I think that was kind of the biggest key in choosing to come to it too. And actually I have some more pictures here too, to show you that kind of replicate, I think, or show how well that worked for me. So first one I have here was actually from my very first day I met you, actually. And I'm not sure if you remember this, but this is me.
Hey, look at that.
This was this was the very first day that I was with you, that I came to you. Because I remember what happened was, you know, obviously you didn't know me, I didn't know you, and you wanted to see how good I was. So what you did was you emailed me, you said, hey, come out to this thing. We're going to have a little cool tournament with some other high school kids, you know, and I'll get to see how you play. And so I came out. By the way, I remember wearing that tank top, and you were like, we got to get that off of you, man.
Was that a basketball jersey?
It was from cross country.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you know, and I only wore it because I was like, well, I don't know. I wanted to show
sense. You're going to the beach, wear a tank top.
Yeah. So yeah, but I remember it was like, you know, I came, you know, I met you for the first time, and you put me out there with Ezra, the kid, and yep, it just took off from there.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, no, I think that was very, and I think because of that, I think that's what made the experience itself become so valuable and interesting for me. And I also actually have another picture. This is obviously not the first day, but it's a little more deep. But this is actually a picture of me. And
I remember that.
We're at practice, and you can see me clearly. But for those of us who are watching visually, if you look closely, you can see Kurt in the back wearing a red jersey.
Yeah, that's my Clippers jersey.
Right. Yeah, no. Lamar Odom jersey.
That's also one of the things I love about beach volleyball is that I can play against you guys.
Right.
You know, I'm not just screaming at you from the sidelines saying, do this, do that. I'm on the court with you guys saying, watch me. Play like me.
And we always thought, and I'll speak for myself, but I'm sure I speak for the team here too. We always loved it when you came out to play. We were like, oh, cool. We get to play against coach, you know?
I loved it.
And you know, it's like you being the player that you were, even despite your age, it's like you were still good. You were still competitive. And we always had a blast, you know, getting to play with you, you know? So it was like, it was all in good fun, basically, is what I'll put it. So
and you know, just so you know, another great thing about it is that I'd go 100% against you guys.
Yes, you would.
I'm not out there letting you win. That's for sure.
No, you weren't.
I try to model for how you should play. You know, like this is how I expect you to play.
Right.
You guys jumped 3 times as high as I do. Right. You shouldn't be getting beat by me.
Right. Yeah. No. And I mean, at least for me, you know, I didn't mind that at all. I was like, hey, dude, bring it. You know. Yeah. If you beat my butt, you know, it's like, hey, you beat my butt, you know.
That's right.
Yeah, it's like, I'll take it. And in some ways, it made me feel better about myself. I was like, okay, cool. You know, it's like, now I know that the coach can see the real me, even if it's, you know, losing me. So
absolutely. Well, you know, and that's another thing I was trying to do was kind of push your buttons and see which teams were going to break, who's going to get frustrated with each other, and you know, roll their eyes or something like that. You know, I'm constantly looking for ways to improve the team from the court.
Yeah. And I'll add a quick side fact too. I remember how for basically the majority of the season, because we had enough players for varsity, majority of the year I was on JV, both because I was a sophomore and because, you know, we had the good players. But I do remember, I think it was actually the last get together we had against another school. You actually put me on varsity for one match.
That's right. That's right. You got called up to varsity.
Yeah, no.
As a sophomore. That was a big deal.
No, and you know, it's like for me, because it's like I said, I got cut from all these other teams and that crushed me. But it was like to get that moment where I get even if there was no letter.
Yeah. It was like there was it was incredibly gratifying as a coach to see somebody improve so much in one season.
Right.
To see where you started and to where you ended in the season. That's why you coach.
Right.
Like, do you know what the number one thing you look for in a coaches look for is coachability.
Right.
Is, can I coach this kid? You know, look, I love having, you know, great God-given, wonderful All-American athletes on the team. But what coaches are really out there for is to produce improvement, you know,
Absolutely.
And to see a player like you that was so coachable, that was just like, yes, sir, no, sir, you know, just, if I say, you know, Keegan, go jump in the ocean.
I do it.
You'd be in the ocean in 30 seconds. You wouldn't say why. What does this have to do with anything?
Right.
Coach said to do it. I'm going to go do it. And that's what coaches look for is coachability. And you have it.
Yeah. I will say, while that does work well in sports, in real life, I can be a little too naive sometimes. I've gotten tricked, and I never like it, but it's like whatever. So, but yeah, no, I remember it's like that last day you called me up to varsity, and I did all right. It's like we lost, but it was like, hey, to me, it didn't matter. There. Yeah, no, we held our ground in that one match. I remember that's what happened. We held our ground, and that to me was good enough. But I guess going back now to specifically your coaching and going back to the spectrum aspect once again, I guess I would ask, aside from me, of course, because, we all know I have autism. Have you ever coached athletes where at least you believe they had some type of mental or emotional condition, such as autism, ADHD, whatever, bipolarity? You get the idea. And basically, based on your interactions with them, what did you believe they were dealing with? Maybe like what stood out to you about them? And then what was it about those differences, I'll call them for now, that, also made them great players and great teammates and great people to coach,
Yeah. So, as a classroom teacher, I've had plenty of kids with autism.
Right.
I've had Down syndrome kids.
Yep.
I've had kids with physical disabilities, the whole thing.
Right.
So before I was the beach volleyball coach at Santa Monica High School, I was actually the baseball coach, the head baseball coach for 2 years.
Yep.
And we had a player on the team with, I'm not sure what the disability was. It wasn't Downs, but he was special ed. He was in special ed classes. He was on the team in a special ed capacity,
right?
And we would let him take batting practice at practice and let him hit a home run, and he'd hit a home run, and
right.
But what I found in all these years of and I'm not thrilled about this word mainstreaming,
right?
Because I think every kid should be in mainstream. I don't think the word should exist.
Right.
Like it's just class.
I get your reason.
The kid's in the class. What do you mean? He's a kid in a classroom. We don't need to put a label on it.
Right.
But what I have found is that yes, the kid with the special, ability or whatever difference, they're obviously benefiting from the situation. Okay.
Right.
But it's all the other kids.
Right.
When I taught kindergarten with a Down student, we had 32 kids in the class. It was the 31 other kids who benefited, in my opinion, even more than the Downs kid did, because for the rest of their lives, these kids were 100% comfortable around Down syndrome people.
Yep.
And it's the same with autism. It's the same with anything, anybody with any differences. Yes, of course, it's great for the athlete to be out there. But it's just as good for everybody else. Right. For everybody else to see that you can play beach volleyball with autism, or you could do all these things, and, if you got to cut them some slack and let them hit a home run at practice every once in a while or something like that, you get to see the joy on their faces, right? So that's what I thought was the biggest benefit was to the team as a whole, or to the classroom as a whole, in addition to whatever it was doing for that special individual. Was the whole team benefited from it.
Right. And I think that's interesting that you mentioned that too, because I don't think a lot of people realize, and I'd even happily admit I myself don't realize this or not, more oftentimes than not, in situations that involve dealing with these challenges, it's not necessarily the people who actually deal with them that, benefit in any way from these kinds of things. It's often always the other people who benefit, because they often learn more than the person who deals with it does, because the person who deals with it learns to live with it and all, and to them it seems like nothing. But to the average person who doesn't deal with these things, they learn so much, because they don't deal with this. They learn so much about it just because this is not something they have to experience with it. And I think that's the important key here to let everybody know here. And I guess building off of that a little, for you, obviously, both as somebody with ADD and also dealing with all these other athletes who both have ADD and all these other things, in your interactions with them, what adjustments did you make per se? And like, what did you learn from them too, that maybe you didn't learn from another player or, your average player or whatnot, what was different?
I would say, going back to my kindergarten classroom,
Right.
is if somebody were to say, what's your discipline policy?
Mhm.
I'd say it's simple. I have 24 kids and I have 24 different discipline policies.
Yep.
It's like, if one kid hits another kid, it's not set in stone what's going to happen there.
Yeah.
It depends on who the kid is.
Mhm.
And it depends on what the kid who got hit just did to the kid who hit him. There's a million different moving parts and variables in there.
Right.
And I found it was the same with the kids. With the differences was there were just so many moving parts.
Mhm.
It's hard for me to say, I did anything differently, because
Mhm.
I treat every kid, I
Right.
know teachers love to say I treat all kids the same. Not me.
Nope.
I treat every kid different. And
Right.
every kid I coach, I treat different.
Right.
My friend coaches at
Right.
okay. And I'm always asking him questions like, well, what if your kids do this? Okay.
Mhm.
And he's, he's very openly, he'll say, depends on who it is.
Right.
If it's your all-American starter,
Right.
the rules are different, just
Right.
like in life,
Right.
And they have an unofficial motto there, fair but not equal. Okay. We treat everybody fairly, but we don't
Right.
treat everybody equally.
Right.
Okay. A starter who breaks a rule is going to have a very different consequence than a bench sitter who
Right.
breaks a rule.
Right.
So ultimately, you're treating all the kids differently to begin with, or at
Right.
least I do. So when I do have kids with different abilities,
Right.
just like everybody else,
Yep.
I don't go out of my way and say, okay, guys, so-and-so gets to start with 5 points,
Mhm.
or something like that. I might do that for a kid who's hurt, who
Right.
shows up to hurt to practice, so there's a million moving parts. And
Mhm.
I don't even pretend to treat every kid equally. I treat
Right.
them all fairly, but not
Right.
equally.
Right. Exactly. And I think that's a lot of things people don't understand the difference in, everybody deserves to be treated fairly.
Yeah.
Everybody deserves to be treated with respect. There's no doubt about that. It's the plain, simple truth.
Right.
But at the same time, everybody's different. And that's the
Yes.
other true part in this. And so
Yes.
as a result, everybody's got to be treated differently.
Right.
Even if maybe at least to other people, that doesn't seem as fair.
Yeah. It doesn't seem fair to everybody else, but it's ultimately fair.
Right. As long as at the end of the day, everybody is receiving the same kind of, like, it's so weird too, because, this is the kind of stuff that, because I'll actually spitball a little here. Another thing I watched recently, not super recently, but also recently, was the movie Moneyball.
Yes.
Which is about how the Oakland A's in the early 2000s explicitly used the power of statistics, which meant they measured stats that, weren't like numbers and all, but rather more, they were calculated numbers.
Yeah.
Like that went more deep into like, not necessarily how good they were overall, but how good were they in certain aspects of the game.
Right.
Like getting on base and stuff like that, know, and how that could benefit the team to the highest degree total, and how, as a result of that, they ended up having the longest win streak in MLB history.
Yeah.
So
and,
it's like,
and remember what they did was they got rid of their prima donnas.
Right. Exactly.
There's a point like, Yasiel Puig is a good example of that. Yasiel Puig, they were able to, the Dodgers were able to put up with his nonsense until he didn't hit 250 anymore.
Right.
Once his batting average dipped below 250, they said he is no longer worth all this trouble.
Right.
And they got rid of him.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good example where he was treated differently than everybody else. He was allowed to be late to practice, and miss buses and stuff like that.
Right. Because
he was hitting 250.
Right.
But the second he dipped below that, they said he's no longer worth it. So that's a good example of he was treated fairly, but not equally.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. So I definitely think that's a good example of that. And I think, you've been talking about what you've drawn away from, your experience as a kindergarten teacher. And I guess I'd like to ask some more specific questions regarding that. But before I do that, I would like to give another shout out to one of our sponsors.
Are you looking to boost your SAT score by at least 360 points? Whether your goal is the SAT, ACT, AP classes, or general test preparation, turn to Sam's Tutoring Company. Sam is a Caltech educated tutor with over 17 years of experience teaching over 700 students of all ages. Whether you want to learn in person or remotely, Sam is ready to help you accomplish your academic goals. Call Sam's Tutoring Company. If you mention the promo code SportsSpectrum, you'll receive 25% off the price of your first session.
For this final section of the episode, I want to, again, I mentioned it before and I'll mention it again, I want to focus more specifically on your experience from your full-time job as a kindergarten teacher for the past 25 years. And so what's interesting for me, at least, is I was first diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum when I was in first grade. So right after kindergarten. And so I would imagine as a result of that, you've had those experiences of kids and also just parents who learn that their kids, or themselves have this, like they go from not knowing about it at all to learning. And so, as a result, they've had similar experiences to me in that regard. And I guess, I'll ask more specifically about that later, but I'll ask a set of questions first that kind of go off topic, but at the same time are focused. And the first one, and I always start off this segment of every episode with this question regarding, the spectrum aspect of it all. And that's about the term mental health. And basically the simple question I'm asking here is, when you hear that, what pops into your head? What does it mean to you?
Well, what pops into my head now is society's evolution on their views of mental health. Mm-hmm. I just watched an amazing documentary about Britney Spears.
Oh.
And I don't know if you've seen it, but it's basically about how society was hammering this poor girl while she was in the midst of basically a mental breakdown. The industry had just tore her to pieces, and the press and everybody just kept piling on her. Mm-hmm. And I think it should be standard viewing for everybody to see how society as a whole used to pounce on these people. Mm-hmm. And same with, look back at Dennis Rodman's career.
Right.
Ron Artest, these guys had mental health issues.
Right.
And society just wants to label them as crazy or uncontrollable. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many. I know Phil Jackson, I think, was really kind to Rodman.
Right.
In a really good example of treating him not equally but fair.
Right.
I don't know if you see, I'm sure you saw The Last Dance.
Oh, I loved it.
You saw how Phil Jackson treated him. He let him go to Vegas.
Right.
Right. Like that's what that wasn't equal to everybody else. He didn't let everybody else go there, but it's what Dennis needed.
Right.
And it's what the team needed. And the team needed Dennis at his best, and that's what they did. So when you say mental health, I just think that, society's really evolving.
Yeah.
Do you watch Saturday Night Live at all?
I do.
Okay. Pete Davidson.
There you go.
He is like the poster boy for mental health nowadays. This is a guy who was publicly breaking down, I think writing on Twitter, he didn't want to be in this world anymore.
Yep.
And rather than society hammering this guy, I'm sure there's some Twitter trolls out there saying, do it. But people surrounded him. He did not get fired from Saturday Night Live.
No, he didn't.
They worked with him. And you see more and more guys leaving sports teams to take a mental health break. Mm-hmm. And, I'm sure it's happening in corporate America and stuff like that.
I'm sure.
So I really think society is really evolving when it comes to mental health. Right. I'm sure you've had crazy hair day at school at some point in your life.
Yep.
Some people are questioning, we should not be making light of the word crazy.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like crazy implies that somebody's having mental health issues.
Right.
And, crazy hair day is not that good a look. I agree with people who say maybe we could find another way of, letting the kids do whatever they want with their hair without calling it crazy.
Like it could be called colorful hair day, for example.
Something. But yeah, when you say mental health, I just think of society's evolution.
Yeah, no, and you're right about that part about how more are becoming more open with it, and all, and those direct examples of it and that stuff, and how, it's like there have been too many instances, I feel, where it's like, people have had to deal with this stuff and, nobody cares
in public
because they're a part of the mainstream media.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, actually, because my next question relates to that. You obviously mentioned how you don't like the word mainstreaming. You think it should be abolished. And I agree with you in that sense. But I guess I would ask to help give our audience some more context. Why don't you describe what mainstreaming means to you, and basically what are the exact disadvantages, and, what are the effects of it, really, and maybe who is it appropriate and not appropriate for, because obviously it's like there are some people who embrace this and others who don't. So
so to me, mainstreaming is basically taking kids with differences that have the option of being in their own smaller special ed classes, and putting them into a mainstream classroom, a normal, quote unquote, normal classroom.
Right.
And, about every other year I get offered the opportunity to mainstream a child. And I don't remember ever saying no.
Right.
There have been times where the child was just not suited for the classroom.
Right.
I had a kid grab some pole or something and break a window once. And this is in kindergarten, and it scared the other kids and stuff like that. So sometimes, the benefits are outweighed by, the negative aspects. Sometimes there's danger involved. Sometimes it's not good for the individual child.
Right.
One of the problems is that it's more expensive for the school district. Now, that's not my problem as a teacher. I'm not the school district accountant.
Right.
But I can tell you that's why a lot of kids are, a lot of parents are dissuaded from mainstreaming, is because it's flat out more expensive to have an aide, a one-on-one aide following that child through a classroom, as opposed to being in a classroom with 8 other kids and 2 teachers, or a teacher and an aide. But like we talked about before, that the benefits are not only for the child but for the whole class, the class as a whole. And if it works, it's a beautiful thing.
Right.
It's always worth trying. To any parents out there, I would say always try to mainstream. Right. And do not listen to the school district.
Right.
The school, you get yourself an advocate. Right. Who's going to advocate for your child and your child only. Because, a lot of times if you listen to the school district, they're going to give you the most fiscally responsible thing for them. Right. And say, oh, we think your child belongs in this classroom here. Right. Always try out mainstreaming.
Right. Yeah. No, definitely. It wouldn't shock me too if I can draw a comparison to that myself, because at least for me, I remember when I was in my elementary school years, how in order to, especially because at the time we didn't know much about what it was doing to me, or what effects it had on me, and what effects it would have on me relating to other people too, like how they would treat me or stuff like that. I remember, some of the things they would do is on some days I'd go to see the school psychologist, for example, or it's like, play a game with her or somebody else there. Like I think my school had an occupational therapist too, who was great, So it was like, for me, I kind of draw a comparison to that, and the fact that, since I had to deal with autism at such a young age, I got to do things that not everybody else did, that kind of like, separated me from everybody else, and, brought a unique experience to me. And I guess I'll kind of build off of that a little bit and ask you another question here. And especially going back to the aspect I mentioned earlier about how I think a lot of kids share that experience of being diagnosed with these things at a very young age, especially around kindergarten and first grade and stuff. And, ask, as compared to those athletes that you mentioned, like, that kid in baseball, who were in high school, who had to deal with these issues, and as a result had different behaviors and stuff like that you noticed. What did you come across when you were dealing with these kindergartners? And what did you believe exactly, given their age and where they were at in their life as compared to those high school kids and other athletes? What were they dealing with?
Well, here's the thing about kindergarten is all the kids are ADD in kindergarten.
Right.
Like, that's the great thing about kindergarten is that, a lot of times I say to the parents, I go, yeah, your kid has a really short attention span.
Right.
But luckily, every 5-year-old does, he's especially the boys.
Mhm.
I remember one child I had in my class, he needed a full-time shadow. Okay.
Okay.
But he was very high functioning. Okay.
Mhm.
So what we were able to work out was his shadow, as far as the rest of the kids were concerned, he was just the classroom aide. And
Right.
nobody knew that he was there for that one specific kid.
Right.
He helped everybody in the class. Now,
Right.
he always had one eye on the
Mhm.
kid he was supposed to be shadowing, but
Right.
we went an entire year without any of the kids knowing that he was there for that certain kid.
Right.
Now, talk about an ideal situation. That was a win-win for everybody.
Yep.
The kid didn't feel ostracized because he had a shadow following him.
Right.
And all the other kids benefited by being with the kid, but they also benefited by having another adult in the room that they could
Right.
ask questions of and stuff and get some help from him with their work and stuff. So that
Right.
was an ideal situation. But the kindergartners specifically, short of having a Downs student,
Mhm.
the autistic students that I've had really didn't stand out that much.
Right.
You know what
Because
I mean?
that's
Like, because a lot of kindergartners don't necessarily make eye contact with everybody
right.
and have speech impediments and, have all their other different issues. The
Right.
autistic kids that I've had, um, like I said, didn't stand out that much because there's lots of kids in kindergarten who don't read in
Right.
kindergarten. Not that no autistic kids don't read, but if the kid was behind everybody else, nobody thought, oh, he must be behind because he's autistic. They just thought,
Right.
oh, it's kindergarten. He can't
Right.
read yet. What's the big deal?
Yep.
Um, but certainly by high school, it becomes a lot more visible.
Right. Of course.
With the social aspects and any physical disabilities or anything. But that's one of the things I love about kindergarten.
Right.
Is that everybody's got their issues in
Right.
kindergarten.
Right. Yep. No. And I guess I'll quickly add on to that. I know you asked this same question in regards to the high school kids you had to interact with who dealt with these challenges, but in your interactions with these kindergartners, who had to deal with these kinds of things, what were your changes and if did you make any of them and how you interacted with them?
Yeah, it's kind of like I was saying before with all the moving parts.
Right.
I accommodate everybody in my classroom.
Right.
If a kid can't hold a pencil, I have to write the words in highlighter and then they trace it. So I'm making accommodations for almost every kid in the class.
Right.
At some point, whether it's social or behavioral or something like that. So it's not that big a deal for me to accommodate an autistic kid with whatever issues he or she has, or a
Right.
Downs kid or anything like that. It's again, I'm treating them like everybody else and just doing whatever accommodations they need.
Yep.
And sometimes it's, I don't expect every kid to finish every assignment.
Right.
I know where the kids are.
Yep.
And if a kid can only finish half the assignment or only write the first letter of a word and
Right.
not spell the whole word, that's fantastic.
Yep.
But I'm constantly differentiating the curriculum throughout the day for my 24 kids. And so when I get a kid in there with special needs, it's just it's just another accommodation. It's not that big a deal. And it's the same thing with the high school kids. It's just a different accommodation. Like I said before, some kids need to be yelled at. Some kids need to be coddled. You're accommodating to every kid out there.
Right.
So it shouldn't be that big of an adjustment when you get one more with another accommodation.
Right. Yeah, no. And I guess that's the big advantage here for people like you. And I guess I'll wrap this up now and ask the question I always ask everybody to end each episode I do, which is that, it's like we both mentioned before, a lot of progress has been made, will continue to be made regarding dealing with these issues, dealing with these challenges, all that stuff. We know that. And we know people have gotten a lot better with dealing with this stuff over the course of time as well. And again, it will continue to get better with, talking about it and learning to live with it and all that stuff. And but of course, this has existed since the beginning of time, and it will continue to exist until the end of time. There's always that stigma of people and, just idea in general that, this shouldn't be accepted. There's something wrong with this. You get the idea, and I'll ask the big question here that I ask everybody to give their answer to, which is, if you had to give advice or something to think about for, the people listening here, any one or a couple of things, regarding this, about how maybe to ignore the stigma or learn to, deal with these issues more, what would that be?
Okay, I would say lean into it. Okay. So like we've discussed, I have ADD. You know what I did? I didn't fight it. I leaned into it, and I found sports and a career where it became an advantage.
Right.
Okay, like that Dempsey kicker. Okay, they leaned into it. They said, "You've got a club foot.
Right.
Let's find something that you can do, and not just do, but excel at."
Right.
So a lot of times, when kindergartners are getting, going through the battery of tests or something, and the parents are, biting their fingernails, hoping that their child isn't quote unquote labeled with something, I say, no. We want him to be labeled. We want her to be labeled because you're getting special attention.
Right.
A lot of the stigmas are gone. But in a public elementary school where I teach, we have 125 kindergartners who are basically randomly placed into first grade classrooms. Okay. Right. Not a whole lot of thought given to their placement unless they have a label. If your child is labeled with ADD or autism or, whatever, anything, people start giving special concern for their placement, and it becomes an advantage, Right. So, so I would say, continue to look for different opportunities, look at your child and figure out, if they do have some differences, how can you lean into it? How can you turn that difference into an advantage? I think I just saw something on 60 Minutes where autistic people are doing great in the workplace in number crunching. Right. And there, I think it was a whole piece on the different career paths that some rather low functioning autistic people are really excelling at. Right. So, if your kid does have some differences, lean into it and figure out a way to make it an advantage. Right. Or at least, like I did with teaching, is something that really plays to it.
Yeah. And it's like, there are plenty of other examples of that I know of in my lifetime. Start with me. It's like I found a way, to both be a good student, be a good athlete, put all the things together and not be afraid, of like messing up when I'm on the court or on the field or whatever. It's like, or in the classroom, it's like, I'm simply not afraid to take on something just because it's like, if somebody asks me to do it and I trust them and all that stuff, I'll do it. It's that simple. And then it's like, you talk about the leaning aspect of finding something you can be really good at. Like, I'm sure the ABC series, The Good Doctor, where the protagonist of that series is a guy who has autism, who happens to be a really good doctor because of his autism. And it's like he possesses abilities that nobody else does because he has it. So it's like, I think, what you said about, leaning into and stuff, that can be super helpful in a lot of ways for all these people who don't necessarily maybe realize that having, dealing with ADHD, dealing with autism, that's not necessarily a bad thing in a lot of ways. It can be a very, very good thing if you're willing to just take the time to find out what that is.
Right. It's everybody's different. Everybody's got their issues.
Right.
Nobody's perfect. And, it's just, and like we talked about with mental health, it's nothing to be ashamed of.
Right.
Yeah. Like whatever your differences are or anything, you just lay them out there. And you say, this is me, it's part of me.
Yep. And what makes me, me.
That's right.
Yeah. No, I definitely think that's more true than anything else. And I guess I'll just say now, Kurt, thank you so much for being here. I had a great time talking with you, and I'm sure our audience loved listening to you. You obviously provide a lot of insight. I love the phrase lean into it. I will definitely take that with me into the future. And
I think that's Michelle Obama, by the way.
Okay, well then credit to the future president of the United States.
There you go.
It's like, that is a great phrase to follow. And I'll just say, please stay in touch with us. We hope to have you again on the show real soon. Just keep doing what you do. What you do is amazing.
Oh, thanks, Keegan.
Keep teaching all these kindergartners the great ironies of life and being hyperactive at such a young age that we all were and love. And I'd also like to thank our subscribers and listeners for joining us today. If you're looking for more great content like today's interview, please go to our website, which is www.sportsonthespectrum.net. And then for all my younger viewers and stuff who are probably listening to this to listen to their very own teacher right now, please remember to follow the 3 rules of life, which are stay safe, have fun, get dirty. From Sports on the Spectrum, I'm Keegan Flegner, and I will see you all on the next episode. And thank you for listening.